Hello again. Well, I must say this week, unusually, atypically, the auction gods, if you believe in such things, have been enormously kind to me. Either that or I've sold my soul to the devil, made a pact, who knows. And I was very fortunate to see something in an auction which went largely, not completely, but largely unnoticed. So I was having palpitations. Now I'm going to show it to you. I'm not going to explain what it is. And I want you to think, if you'd seen this in a catalogue, would you have had palpitations too? And be kind. Because remember, I've bought this now. FA Cup, but it shrunk. No, it is ostensibly and was catalogued as an early Victorian silver-mounted vase. Bit small for a vase, but I wouldn't, two-handled vase. That is the form. And it beautifully gilt, silver gilt, all the mounts, hallmarked for London, correctly hallmarked on the base, as it should be, as a separate part. And just below the everted rim, this lovely cast scalloped rim. All of that, just whilst we're on it, all of that detail there has to be done by hand after it's cast. You have to pick out all that detail with very fine little burins and hammers and mat that entire surface. And then it's gilded and then it's polished and it's lots of processes involved. But beautifully hallmarked there. Sadly, because it's so tightly curved in two directions and maker's marks are flat punches, it's not clearly struck who the maker is. It's possibly I or JC, so it might be Joseph Craddock. That's a possibility, but thankfully all the other marks here and here are nice and clear, and we can tell it's for London 1839. I must say, when I bought it, it was black, nearly. And you don't clean silver gilt with silver polish, because that has a tendency to be too abrasive and whip the gilding off. What you do is you get yourself a box of matches, you strike the matches, you soak the tips of the spent matches in very weak soapy water, warm water, until they start to soften, and then you put the radio on, you get comfortable, and you start very gently rubbing the end of the soaked match against the dirt, and eventually, after a couple of hours, the dirt will come away, will leave the gilding, and you get this lovely finish. The mounts are very elaborate, very beautifully done. This, as I said, is cast and all chased. These handles are cast, and again, they're not just cast, they are then hand finished. They are to bring out all the detail in them. So you've got these lovely caryatid, sort of neo-Renaissance style handles, and then you've got a little bit of Victorianism on these straps here. You've got a little bit of shells and scrolls, but then it all gets a bit florid at the foot where it's flat chased with scrolls and flowers, and that's more Victorian. Now you're probably thinking, well, yes, I mean, that's very nice, Michael. I'm not saying it's not very nice, and we're delighted you've got it. But is that a fantastic find in and of itself? It's not very big, is it? This is all about appearances being deceptive. This was catalogued as Victorian, 1839, with a nicely carved, you might think it's glass, but a nicely carved rock crystal body. Now, when you see something like this, you have to think back to the beginning of the 19th century and to collectors like William Beckford of Fonthill Abbey. Beckford was a magpie, and he loved acquiring early pieces, early fragments of things, Chinese ceramics as well. But once he got them, that wasn't enough. It wasn't enough for the early 19th century collector to own a lovely early object that might not be in perfect state. As we would today, we'd simply mount it on a plinth and light it and admire it. But back in the early part of the 19th century, they wanted whole objects. They wanted these things to be made a workable piece. They wanted them to be remounted into objects. And this is what's gloriously happened in this instance. The mounts are 1839. The rock crystal body is very much earlier. And this is where all the excitement lay, and all the worry as well, wondering whether anybody else would recognise it. But happily they didn't. Now, features of the rock crystal. Firstly, you'll see it is cracked. Lots of rock crystal vessels are cracked, not because they've been dropped, but because the crystal itself has a flaw in it when it's being worked. But when you get to a certain stage, you just have to go with it, I'm afraid. And many of the pieces you will see in national museums and collections of rock crystal vessels will have cracks and losses, and often, if they've been remounted, a portion of silver gilt or filigree or some other decorative metalwork will mask those cracks if they possibly can as part of the mounting. There is a very famous vessel at Burley House in Stamford, which is just an example of that. The front of it has become damaged, and there's a huge panel of finely worked 17th century filigree just covering it, inset with jewels and rubies, and a little portrait cameo of Queen Elizabeth I. I'm sure you all know it. I don't have to tell you, do I? This, you can see, is beautifully carved with scrolls and Renaissance ornament, which is fitting because it was made during the Renaissance. It's that old. This is a true 16th century rock crystal body. Sadly, parts of it became detached from whatever mounts it had. It would originally have been a small scent flask or a small bottle, casting bottle possibly, for casting sweet scented water, but probably a scent flask. The mounts originally may have even have been gold, which is why when it became damaged, those mounts were taken off, melted, but the body was just kept as a curiosity until someone in 1839 decided to mount it up in silver gilt, as it may have been. Well, this is the Victorian interpretation of what it might have looked, 300 years earlier. Where was it made? It was made either in Milan or in Prague, because it is from, almost certainly from all the stylistic elements here, it is from the very famous Miseroni workshops. And they began in Milan, but they moved to Prague to create vessels for the Habsburg emperors. This is how important and rare and wonderful these things are. It is quite remarkable that in a small country sale room a week ago, nestling amongst teapots and flatware and all manner of things, there was a genuine, let this sink in, Renaissance period vessel, a real gem. I don't think we can call it a masterpiece, because the masterpieces are the large ewers and goblets that stand about 18 inches, 12 to 18 inches high, all the low taxers with beautiful scroll gilt mounts. But this is still remarkable. If you'd told me last week that I, on my meagre budget, would end up owning a piece of Renaissance rock crystal. That was, all the artists were about. Michelangelo, Raphael, slightly earlier, I know. Popes were up to no good, misbehaving like you couldn't imagine. And ladies were walking around with this wonderful rock crystal vessel. It's remarkable. It's remarkable what turns up, what survives, and where it can be found. Huge thank you to the auctioneer for cataloguing. The whole thing is Victorian. Huge thank you to everyone that viewed it for not realising it was about 350 years earlier. God bless you all. Now, that's a remarkable find. This doesn't happen every day. It doesn't even happen every year. I'm sad to say. This is, this will go down as a high point in it's certainly in the last 5 or 10 years of discoveries. But it's there. It's there, and it didn't cost a fortune. So go out and look, but most importantly, it isn't all about finding it. It's about knowing what it is when you found it. Because I promise you, every silver dealer in the country will have probably seen that. And thankfully, didn't really recognise the body for what it was and just judged it as a little Victorian trinket, which happily it's not. Anyway, that's enough of me being unbearably smug. I am sometimes, and, with good reason on this occasion. So go out, try not to bid against me. I'm sure now eventually you will. That will be my comeuppance. That'll teach me for having a big mouth. But good antiques hunting, and goodbye.